Thanks to Joey in the comments section of my last video for putting me onto this. Queensland hoping to attract 500 foreign police officers a year to boost recruitment. 23rd of Feb 2023. The state's police minister acknowledges difficulties in attracting new recruits is apparently the reason. They don't detail the difficulties other than to say the pandemic has thrown challenges at the police. And you think they'd have the opposite problem of too many recruits, given the downturn in the economy caused by the whole of government intervention. It was lockdowns and transferring hundreds of billion dollars to the banks and aiding large corporations and shutting down small businesses. They have approval for 500 recruits each year for the next 5 years. That's 2,500. Will the pandemic still be a reason in 5 years' time? Well, the ABC that ran this story also run coronacasts, which is still going to this day. In a recent coronacast just this month on the right-hand side, 1st February 2023, 3 years on, is COVID still an emergency? In other words, should this coronacast still be here? Well, the ABC is government-owned, and according to that coronacast, they didn't read this government announcement, Australia's Biosecurity Emergency Pandemic Measures to Aid. This was on April 17 last year. So that coronacast is redundant. It was announced on the 25th of March 2022 following medical advice from Professor Paul Kelly, the Commonwealth Chief Medical Officer. Now, not only did the ABC seem to miss this, so did the Queensland Government, South Australian Government, I think Victorian Government, because they still ran emergencies after this. It appears that at those national cabinet meetings, Minister Hunt didn't bother to say, oh, by the way, the emergency's over, everybody. Or if he did, maybe they were, distracted by something, but for some reason they didn't communicate to them. And it had to end regardless of this announcement, otherwise they couldn't hold a federal election. As I mentioned before, the Constitution was suspended and you can't hold the election, you can't issue the writs. This was exactly 33 days of permissible time, minimum time, before polling day. I did try to announce it on my YouTube channel, but the video got taken down as misinformation. It appears they wanted to announce it for legal reasons, but they didn't want people to know about it. So back to this coronacast. They don't really say yes or no, but throughout the podcast, this is a transcript, some of it, they do. If you look at the plague, the Black Death epidemic was a epidemic of about 300 years. Same as COVID, just like COVID. So 5 years, let's get off lightly, according to the great Dr. Swat. I mean, COVID was inappropriately compared to the Spanish flu. At least it was a respiratory thing, but he takes it to the next level. Look at the plague. As humorous as Dr. Swan's musings are, there is a sinister message in this one. So he asks the question, when will it actually stop being a pandemic? I mean, maybe 300 years from now. One signal might be when it becomes seasonal. It is not yet seasonal. With the ceasing of all emergency orders, essentially it has been treated like seasonal flu. But there's one aspect that isn't yet. And you might have guessed it, once this experimental pharmaceutical product has been integrated into national immunisation programs and combined with flu vaccination. Now, what he says actually makes perfect sense, because this is the cases they went up that coincided with people being injected with the experimental pharmaceutical product that causes cells to make spike protein that gets detected and becomes a case of COVID-19. So, of course, it looks like it's at least 3 times higher than the peak earlier on in that year. And if you look to the left, the scale is 3,000 daily reported cases. And once you had over 85% of people with the jab, by December, over summer here, it's spiked much higher. In fact, I've just got an arrow to the previous graph. And if you look to the side, it's gone from 3,000 to 175,000. So no virus has a row difference, which is the spreadability, like between variants. It'd have to be a different virus entirely. In fact, no virus would have that kind of spread. It could only be detected if they were detecting what was put inside people's bodies. So they combine the experimental pharmaceutical product with an actual vaccine, the flu vaccine, and administer at the same time. Well, that's done just before the flu season. Then your peaks aren't going to be over summer. It's going to become seasonal. So, see, what he says, you got to give him his due. He is a doctor after all. Despite his wild claims about the plague in 300 years, I mean, in this part, he's actually making sense. Now, some professions already make it mandatory for years to have the flu injection. That'll roll the nanoparticle injections in with that mandate. Back to the 5-year pandemic, according to the police, not the 300-year one. He's a doctor, I'm not ruling that out. So all in this article, they say it's thrown out challenges. When it gets to the statistic, in the very same article, the very same guy does a complete about-face. He says there was allocated funding for 1,450 positions. He said the service was on track to meet the recruitment goal. Where's the challenge? Bottom part there. Queensland Police Service advised the first 2 years recruitment has hit their target. 600 police candidates this month, 500 next month. So there's plenty of young Queenslanders stepping up. Here's some more statistics. 345 recruits undergoing training, 144 due in May. So as you said, they're meeting targets. Now they have to quote the statistics because they're recorded and people can double check them. So all they do is tell you the statistics then make a statement that's the exact opposite. Well, let's just say they weren't getting enough. Hypothetically, they are, but let's just say they weren't. Why not go around Australia first? Offer to move Aussies from other states up to Queensland. Why go straight to the foreigners? And there would appear to be some legal and also practical impediments to this crazy plan of having armed foreigners walking around our streets, policing us with the right to use force. If they run this past the Queensland public, was this an election promise? We're going to bring in foreigners and we're going to have them roaming the streets watching what you're up to. According to this article from Indeed Recruitment, Australian Federal Police only accept Australian citizens, same as the Defence Department. But these police operating within Australia don't have to be Australian citizens or permanent residents. Now, all foreigners need a permit, some kind of visa, to work within Australia. An agreement was struck between the state and federal governments for this to happen. Now, the article didn't detail anything in the agreement, but here was a link from the Queensland government, Queensland Lewis International Police. So I clicked on it to find the details, and this came up. Media statement not found. Now, I did this yesterday, the 25th of February, and it was put up on the 23rd. So within 2 days, I've decided, hang on a minute, I'm not too happy about what's in this media statement. It doesn't always work, but I tried it. I put that link into Google Cache and found it. So from this extract, you can see the core of the agreement is that the federal government has agreed to issue visas so that those people can be employed. The Immigration Department routinely issues visas for such jobs as fruit pickers in Griffith, but those visas are for 3 months or for 6 months or 12 months. It's a set time. But what kind of working visa is there? I mean, if there is, there must be, where someone can move to Australia, take up a full-time job, and stay here forever, and never ever be an Australian citizen or a permanent resident. Now, that would be wrong for factory workers, but it's even worse because these jobs involve physical force against members of the public. Now, if a police officer oversteps the mark, admittedly they have their reviews and they let them all off most of the time, even when they kill someone, but at least there's a pathway for people to either get civil compensation or even get a police officer prosecuted. But a foreign national, they have the protections of the country that they're from. That has implications on what could be happening in our jurisdiction. So I'm wondering if there's more than just the agreement with the Immigration Department as far as the visa goes, but also some kind of immunity from civil and criminal prosecution, which is what is in the Defence Amendment Act 2020 for foreigners, including foreign police during emergencies. Could you imagine if one of these foreign officers kills a young Australian? It can happen sometimes, just in policing, people get killed. The family finds out it was a foreigner who's already left the country or is holed up in the consulate. Now, that can't happen with the AFP because they have to be Australian citizens, as does members of the Defence Force. And that's also for national security reasons as well as loyalty reasons. You don't want foreign governments to start to stack up public service full of their own agents. So think of all the intel they could gather and all the damage they could do. Now, that would have to apply to state police as well, but apparently not. So sure, they might be employed and their immediate bosses might be some local area commander, but who's to say they're not reported to someone else overseas? And one of the protections that the Australian people get is that the recruits swear an oath on top of being a fellow Australian. Now, it's a requirement of Queensland legislation that police officers also have to swear an oath of office. Now, what they actually swear to is an oath to keep and preserve the peace of, well, was Her Majesty, now it's King Charles. Now, of course, there's a lot of indications that that's not always the case, but there's argument there. But that's not the most important part of this oath. The most important part is the legal part of it. And that's those 4 words, 4th line down in the middle, in the office of constable. So they're holding an office. So can a foreigner hold an office within the Australian political system? I mean, the politicians, they all swear an oath. In fact, you can't even have dual nationality to be in Parliament, and Prime Minister, that person swears an oath, and have to be Australian citizens. So here are the 2 questions that relate to the legal side of it. Is there a visa type that allows a foreigner to be in Australia permanently working a full-time job without ever being a citizen or permanent resident? And again, what are the implications of them being foreigners if they do something wrong? And can a foreigner hold an office within any government in Australia? That's effectively an office is you're an official. So what is this actually about? Well, this sort of tells you that it's 500, an exact number for a set number of years, confirms that this is a plan. And again, I'll just mention, why not go to other parts of Australia? Just advertise Australia-wide. We'll relocate you, come and live here. Have they even tried that? No, they've gone straight to bringing foreigners in. So obviously there's an ulterior motive. And they definitely want foreigners here. I think in some ways it's tied to this article, just speculation, because this looks at the date of it just before COVID, militarisation of police, particularly in the States, but even here in Australia, after that man Monis thing went on, the police were then given the ability to carry automatic weapons. And look at the way they're dressed now. They've got bulletproof vests on, and yeah, they look like soldiers. Now, what they're doing as far as bringing foreigners here for that, I'm pretty sure that'll be happening in other parts of the world to integrate to have a global police force. That's what I think this is the beginning of. You watch the other states will start to do it as well. So that's just speculation, though. What you do know, though, is they intend on having armed foreigners walking around in amongst us. This agreement is key to it. So if I was a Queenslander, because you'd be the best place to get a freedom of information request in for that agreement, just quote this media when you're trying to identify the document, because they don't give you information. You have to know the document that you want. So you just go, the agreement that this media statement relates to, and then try and break it down, and then ask them some questions that I've already mentioned. All right, that's it for this one.